Welcome to Uncovering Dark Falls, the podcast that is officially endorsed by, well, nobody on record, but it is very heavily monitored by the town council. So hello, I know you're listening. Hey, just to catch you guys up on some lore here that we've uncovered on the show. We're about halfway through season 1 at this point, and I just want to use this as like a catch-up thing before we dive into the mustard of the episode. Some of you have asked, Gideon, if your phone dies and all of your, modern tech dies, like your headphones and stuff, if all those batteries shut off when you go to these haunted locations or when you investigate these, mysterious far out, locations or whatever, how are you getting photos for the podcast? And well, I'll have you know, I'm not just an investigator. I'm a bit of an experimenter as well, and I've been experimenting with different kinds of tech, and I swear the only piece of tech that doesn't become entirely obsolete when I go to these haunted places and these far-out locations is this Digicam. I swear this thing is like from 2003. And that's part of the reason, it's the entire reason, actually, why the photos look the way they do for the podcast. Trust me, I would love to have like a super modern, polished, high production situation going on. But as stated before, all of my modern and new tech just stops working when I go to these places, except for this Digicam that is more than 20 years old at this point. Not only that, but I'm convinced at this point, 9 episodes in now, that the podcast itself is haunted. Case in point, the music that you hear in this show, it just happens. You know what I mean? Like it's like the podcast knows when I'm talking about these haunted places, and it knows when I'm talking about my investigations of these locations, and it just cues in, and it's like, not only does it know when I'm talking about these things, but it knows what I'm going to say next. I still haven't figured that out. I don't have an editor or a music person putting this in. It just happens. But as creepy as that is, it's not hurting anybody. So we just roll with it here. All right. I've encountered a problem and I want to tell you about it. With it being the month of October, I felt it would be fitting to seek out events in the history of Dark Falls, that have occurred during this month, even by the over-commercialized standards of Western society. Halloween is clearly more important here than in any other part of the country. I mean, sure, you've got your Salems and your St. Helens, Oregon, or wherever, but Dark Falls, they do not mess around. If the town is sleepwalking for most of the year, it's like the holidays are the time that it truly awakens, man. The stores here do not do like a slow rollout like you might see at like Lowe's or whatever, dude. The stores here have been ready since early August, fully stocked, continuing to be restocked. And while certain aspects of my investigations have put me on edge, if you've been following so far, I can't help but feel the twinge of excitement still. October is here. We made it. I have some decorations up, to really get myself into the spirit. But of everything that people associate with All Hallows, like witches, bats, spiders, black cats, I felt like I was gonna run off into a little poem there. Despite all of those things, there's nothing that really makes me feel more nostalgic than just like your simple jack-o'-lantern, man. The way a knife carves out the eyes and the mouth of a pumpkin, so too am I carving out the mysteries of this town. See what I did there? For this time of year, there are a few instances that I've come across that appear to be noteworthy on the surface, a couple of which involved some masks. But unfortunately, I've had difficulty tracking down official sources regarding this event. However, I have pinpointed one person of interest who may be able to offer some insight. He's a man by the name of Steve Boswell. Apparently, him and his wife were at the center, I guess I should say he and his wife were at the center of this whole mask fiasco when they were kids. And while I haven't had much luck getting in touch with them, he does seem to at least know I exist. Just hoping that we can find a time when both of our schedules align so I can see what I can learn from them, you know? Now, even though that mystery has hit a temporary roadblock, I do have another that is Halloween adjacent. I was skimming through the Dark Falls news site, and that's when I came across an article that piqued my curiosity. It was from October of 1996 and clipped straight from the newspaper. Here's what the headline said. Let me put on my news anchor voice. Local mystery, 4 have vanished. Let me know if that was okay. Now, underneath this headline were black and white photos of 3 men and a woman. And the most striking thing about them was that they were all on the larger side. This was one of the 2 commonalities between them, and the second is that the incidents all seemed to occur when the families of those who vanished were all sleeping. As far as I can tell, their disappearances were never officially solved. And as far as I can also tell, the first of these people went missing at the beginning of October, with the last of them falling victim around Halloween. What was the cause then? Someone who had a grudge against obese people, like Patrick Pewterschmidt from Family Guy? It didn't seem likely, especially since no traces of these people were ever found, and the details regarding these crimes are, well, murky at best. No members of the victims' families mentioned them acting unusually leading up to anything. Seems like a dead end, right? Well, thanks to the power of persistence and a little bit of thick-headedness, and, more than several cups of coffee, I managed to overcome this hurdle. Sitting in front of my computer, I kept browsing the site in hopes of finding other stories that mentioned those victims. Unfortunately, nothing came up in any official stories. But then, I got the hunch to try searching in the miscellaneous section. As the name implies, the topics here are entirely random. These can range from something as mundane, yet as wholesome, as who got the first place in the pie contest or the science fair, to even some more mischievous matters, like who keeps vandalizing the local high school with spray paint. Sometimes, though, they'll post stories that lean more towards the eerie. Putting my news anchor voice back on. Wisps of Dark Falls, natural phenomena, Halloween hoax, or something more. The article was dated for October 22nd, 4 days before the news reported the last missing person in town that month. It says, residents say they've been seeing floating lights in and above the woods of Dark Falls. These mysterious orange orbs reportedly first appeared at the beginning of this month, and there's been conflicting opinions about whether there's a natural explanation, an early Halloween prank by some pranksters, or something less explainable. Here are the quotes of those who claimed to have witnessed them. Oof, I'm gonna turn off the news anchor voice for these quotes. You guys will like these. Check this out. Walter Pikes says, "It was so cool. I was brushing my teeth before bed, and then I noticed these orange lights from my windows. They were dancing above the woods, above my friend's house. I wonder if maybe they could be ghosts or something." Tabitha Weiss adds, "Gosh, they were so annoying. How is a girl supposed to get her beauty sleep when those stupid things beam on her? I don't care what they are. I just want whoever's making them to go away. Why are they always shining in my window?" Few more. Lee Winston adds, "Hey, I don't mean to brag, but I am pretty much the best prankster in Dark Falls, and let me tell you something. These orbs are amateur hour. Seriously, how are people spooked by something so mundane? It's obviously some people just using flashlights and mirrors. If I were the one making them, I would at least throw in some bed sheets to make it look like ghosts. Now that's how the pros do it." Leave a comment if you think Lee is somebody who you'd want to hang out with as a friend. I think no for me. The next 2 quotes come from a brother and sister combo, I guess. It's Shane and Shanna Martin. Also, if you are a parent or one of 2 parents and you have, 2 kids, please stop naming them almost identical names. It's so silly. I know it doesn't, affect me or anybody at all, but it just feels so annoying, dude. Shane and Shanna? Come on. Anyway, Shane says, "We think they're neat. but we don't believe in all that paranormal stuff. Our parents think it's silly, but we would love to know what's causing them. Earth is a really special place." And then Sister Shanna adds after that, "They are amazing. I was sleeping, and then I woke up to some kind of buzzing noise. Kind of like the sound a wasp makes, except a lot friendlier. Anyway, I went outside in my pajamas, and they were right above my house. They almost seemed to be flying around. And then they floated off into the woods and vanished. Do I think they could be something supernatural? Yeah." Then our last quote here that I'll add comes from Drew Brockman. Drew says, "Well, my dad does call me Elf, which I wish he would quit. But no, my parents tell me they're probably just unusually large fireflies making them. We do have swamps around here, so it makes sense." Now, right off the bat, when I saw mentions of lights, I instantly thought, like you probably did too, UFOs, right? Some sort of alien activity. I've seen tons of UFO footage. Up until now, I've just dismissed them as being merely for entertainment value and offering nothing of real value beyond that. Now, however, I am starting to think that they have more credibility than I originally thought. Of the people that were interviewed that I mentioned prior, I chose to only share the people mentioned above for reasons that I hope will be apparent soon. It turns out, Drew and Walker are no longer residents of Dark Falls. In fact, I found both of their Facebook pages saying that they both moved away to attend different colleges out of state as soon as they turned 18. They're still in touch. I've seen them liking and commenting on each other's posts. However, the same cannot be said for Shane and Shanna, the siblings. They also have profiles, but I've seen no interaction between them and Drew or Walker, which leads me to believe that they may have been preemptively barred from contacting them. Now, while it isn't unheard of for friends to drift apart, blocking them indicates that they may have done something a little beyond the pale, right? So I had to wonder what it could have been. I should also mention that both Drew and Walker are what can best be described as dangerously thin. I don't mean to be rude or anything like that, I promise, but I mean, we're talking borderline skeletons here, man. People have commented with similar thoughts on their posts and received some very choice words from them in response, maybe rightfully so. And before I reached out to them, I decided to see if the library held more information about the so-called Wisps of Dark Falls. But these things are being called the lights. Although I didn't find any information beyond what was already posted in the local news, I did discover that there's an archive of school yearbooks. Drew, Lee, Shane and Shanna, Tabitha, and Walker all went to the same school. I started cruising through all the pictures, and two details caught my eye. Wait till you hear these. The first one is that Drew and Walker and Shane and Shanna are rarely situated near Lee or Tabitha in any of the class photos. In the few ones that they are not smiling. Meanwhile, Drew and Walker are. Now this trend holds true until the 1996 photos. All the ones after the ones taken in October only show Shane and Shanna smiling. I couldn't help but notice that. Lee and Tabitha are not smiling. Neither are Drew nor Walker, for that matter. You know what? In fact, they always seem to be standing as far as possible from them. In the following yearbooks, Lee and Tabitha undergo noticeable weight gain. Now, I'm not a psychologist, you know this, or anything of the sort, but if I had to bet money, I would say that whatever the reason is for this, it had to do with the lights or something else that occurred during October. With this in mind, I tried messaging Drew and Walker. I was direct. I asked them about their past friendship with Shane and Shanna, and both of them blocked me. Drew didn't even respond, but Walker did. He replied with a single message that told me, "The less you know about them, the better." Now, since this figurative road was closed off to me, I had no choice other than to see if I could get information from either Shane or Shanna. I messaged the former, and he responded right away. It turns out they both still live in Dark Falls. Some back and forth went on, and he ended up inviting me over to his house. Now, pulling into his neighborhood, I appreciated all the decorations that covered each house like a little cozy blanket. They were, truthfully, mesmerizing. I loved it, man. Now, ironically, Shane's home stood out the most to me despite being more subtly decorated. He chose to do a theme based on the aliens from Mars Attacks. Am I right? Life-size models of the Martians holding ray guns were all over his yard, and his driveway was lined with green lights. I parked on the curb, and I went up to his doorbell. He'd had a growth spurt since being a kid. I mean, hell, I have expected him to hit his head on the doorframe. Dude was huge. I said, "Hey, I'm Gideon. We talked on Facebook the other day." He smiled and replied, "Of course. It's nice to meet you in person. I'm happy you could make it." He stuck out his hand, and when I shook it, this weird sensation came over me. The closest thing that I can think of to compare it with is the feeling you get when you see the uncanny valley. You know, like when robots look too much like people, right? I shook it off, hoping he hadn't sensed that I was uncomfortable all of a sudden. Now, the inside of the house is kind of hard to describe. There was really no rhyme or reason to the layout aside from the decorations that he had up. His furniture had to be decades old, man. None of it matched, and it looked like whoever put it up had only been described the concept of style 10 minutes prior. Now, before we could get too comfy, Shane says, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't have any food in the fridge. I usually just eat out. Can I order you a pizza?" I said, "No, that's all right, man. But if you don't mind, can we just get right to it?" He says, "Of course, that won't be an issue. Have a seat." He motioned to the couch, and I sat down while he sat on the recliner. And then he asks, "So, what would you like to know?" And I said, "You know what, dude? Everything. Tell me everything." He flashed me this grin that almost seemed a little sinister for a moment before really softening. And he goes on to say, "Shanna and I were next-door neighbors to Drew when we were growing up. Our other friend, Walker, also lived in the neighborhood. Halloween was our favorite time of the year. I mean, it still is for me and my sister. I don't know if Drew or Walker feel the same way, since we haven't been in contact for years." I interrupted, and I said, "Were you all close?" Shane replies, "Yeah, we were practically inseparable." Now, Shane's expression became more thoughtful in this moment. And I asked, "Okay, well, what changed?" He pauses, and his eye starts scanning me. And he says, "Drew and Walker had a bullying problem." And I just assumed it was Lee and Tabitha. So I asked, "Was it them too?" And he says, "Yeah, she was the brains between them. One year, she thought it would be a riot to stage a break-in with some high schoolers during a Halloween party. It didn't matter if it was fake. To us, we were in real danger. So we decided to get even." And I asked, "Okay, well, how'd you do that?" Shane says it was Drew's idea. She was always clever. It's one of the things that I miss most about her. The year after the party incident didn't pan out because Tabitha and Lee flaked out on us, but the year after that was a different story. We got them to go trick-or-treating with us. I let out a little chuckle after hearing this, and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't really see how going trick-or-treating with these guys and getting candy is revenge. Tell me more." And Shane smiled even bigger now, like he knew something I didn't. He goes on to say, "I bet they thought the same thing until they ran into the pumpkin heads." And I said, "Wait, the pumpkin heads? Go on." Shane says, "That's right. Most of the other kids were heading home at this point. Drew told me that's when they leapt out from behind a tree. There were two kids wearing black robes and jack-o'-lanterns over their heads with literal flames inside the pumpkins. Drew says she could feel the heat from them. Now, in this moment, sitting here in this living room with Shane telling me all this, I already had a ton of questions, but I held them back. I just decided to let him keep going. And he did. Shane goes on to say, Drew and Walker have no idea who these pumpkin heads are. Tabitha and Lee think it's me and Shanna, but they decide to play along. Now, the pumpkin heads want to go trick-or-treating with everybody, and they agree, and for a while, nothing else out of the ordinary happens. Then the pumpkin head suggested going to a different neighborhood, and that's when the horror of the night truly started. Shane was such a good storyteller. My mouth was dry, but I didn't want to interrupt and ask for anything to drink because he was on a roll. I dryly muttered out, "What happened?" Shane goes on to say, "Those pumpkin heads made them trick-or-treat for hours. It didn't matter that their bags were so full the candy was overflowing or that their feet were starting to blister. The pumpkin heads would not let them stop trick-or-treating. They'd make them eat the candy until they puked, and then they would keep going. The pumpkin heads were quick, too. Nobody would have been fast enough to outrun them. And whenever anybody tried to stand up to them, they'd circle everyone with a ring of fire and threaten to burn them alive. Eventually, they came across one house that shook them to their core. The one who answered was another pumpkin head. In fact, this new neighborhood was full of them, and they came out towards Drew and the others. Now, what truly scared them to their core is that whatever these things were, their heads were removable. Now, just again, me sitting here, thirsty in this dude's living room, my spine becomes icy hearing this, man. I cannot get enough. He goes on to say, they had some extra ones for Tabitha and Lee to make them just like them. Naturally, they struggled, but it was no use. The pumpkins were placed on their heads, and then they ran home screaming. There was a heavy silence as Shane stared at me, and then he burst out laughing, and that's when I put it together, and my apprehension was replaced by amusement. I said, "Okay, hold on. So was that all you and Shanna?" He held up a hand as if to say, "Guilty as charged." And I said, "Okay, well, what about the orbs that everybody was seeing in the sky?" And he goes, "Yep." I said, "No way, dude, but there were multiple pumpkin heads." He says, "Members of our family who helped us out. You should have seen the looks on Tabitha and Lee's faces. They dropped their bags when they ran off, too. Drew and Walker had so much candy that night." I asked, "Okay, how did you pull all this off, Shane?" He goes, "Sorry, family secret. I'd never be able to live it down if they found out I gave it away to a stranger, but I'll tell you what, the rest of our family lives in a neighborhood not too far from here. They always go all out for Halloween and love when visitors pass through." Shane gave me some directions. I thanked him for his time, and then I skedaddled. But before I did, he spoke up. He says, "By the way, Gideon, feel free to visit again anytime, and try to put some meat on your bones, man. Our family hates having guests who are underfed." Not thinking much about this, I gave him a nod, and I headed out the door. The neighborhood that his directions led to was isolated, and I immediately noticed the lack of sound, aside from the howling wind. Shane wasn't lying. The way the houses there were decked out made everywhere else in Dark Falls seem like child's play, believe it or not. Even the trees in the woods were decorated. To tell you the truth, I was stunned. But I also had to have a little come to Jesus with myself too. I've spent so much time seeking out answers of the supernatural that I failed to see the perfectly logical ones, even when they're staring me in the face. I noticed someone coming out of their home. It was a woman who very much resembled Shane. Putting two and two together, I figured this must be Shanna. As I passed, she smiled and waved at me. I returned the gesture before passing by. It's amazing what a difference a split-second choice can make. In my case, it was my decision to glance in my rearview mirror as I was going downhill to exit the neighborhood. What made me slam on my brakes was seeing Shanna floating above the ground and inspecting her decorations. Somehow, she realized I was staring at her, and then she turned to meet my gaze in the rearview mirror. And then more of them joined her. Grins stretched across all of their faces, wide enough to split the skin. Then, in an instant, they all turned into orange orbs, and then jack-o'-lanterns in black robes. Pedal to the metal, I was racing home now. When I finally calmed down, I thought about everything that Shane had shared with me, and everything that I had learned in my investigations, and then something dawned on me. I never tried finding out what became of Tabitha and Lee. When I found the answer, I thought back to the pictures of the victims in the newspaper and the last thing that Shane told me. He said, "Our family hates having guests who are underfed." Both Tabitha and Lee had vanished in 1 year without a trace. I want to say thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of Uncovering Dark Falls. We're here. We made it. It's Tuesday morning if you're listening in real time. Hey, consider joining the Patreon. For $5 per month, you get early access to all the episodes, behind-the-scenes content, and voting privileges. That's a cool thing, right? And listen, if you're not a Patreon person, that's totally fine. Or if we just don't want to throw an extra $5 to somebody every month, I get it. I'm right there with you. Share the podcast, dude. The podcast YouTube thing you're listening on has a share feature, probably. Use that thing, man. You got a friend who likes Goosebumps. You got a friend who likes spooky stuff. And if it isn't obvious, I'm going to lift the curtain all the way up here, all right? Dark Falls is a podcast series. This is it. You're part of the club now, okay? You can't tell anybody this. It's a series about a paranormal investigator named Gideon who lives in the Goosebumps universe. This is episode 9. I hope this is obvious by now, but if this is the first episode you've seen, or one of the first, and that hasn't been addressed, directly yet, that's the jam. That's the vibe right there. Normally in this part of the episode, I would tease a little bit of the next investigation that I'm throwing myself into, but one hasn't fallen into my lap yet. So I'm realizing that if I want to keep the podcast running, I gotta go find these mysteries, man. Not always will they just plop into my lap, and that's okay. So it's time to go put boots on the ground. I hate that phrase, but it's time to go get dirty. Is that a better phrase than boots on the ground? Get dirty? I don't know. We'll see. Let me go see what trouble I can stir up, okay? This episode had a special guest writer. His name is Rose Black, and I've been a Rose fan for years. Man, I just love the way he just understands the assignment. He was watching the show before I asked him to be a writer, and he just got it. So if this episode felt supernatural, if it felt like the way it's supposed to, what am I saying, dude? If it didn't feel out of place, it's because, despite it having a guest writer, it's because the writer, Rose Black, just gets it. He knew exactly what I needed, and he made it happen. And then some. Thanks, man. I know you're listening. Cool. I'll see you guys next week.
Uncovering Dark Falls is written by David Caleb and Dr. Plague. Created, produced, and narrated by Darek Weber.